Thank you very much. I am the dinosaur in the room. I am so much older than the other speakers, not the audience. But geography and women studying geography have come on a very long journey, even in my lifetime. When I started, we were very young. There I am at the age of 18, matriculating with all my friends at St Hugh's. 9 of us geographers at St Hugh's in those days. I don't think you have any at St Hugh's now. That's very sad. But in those days, there were the 5 colleges that had women: St Hugh's, St Anne's, LMH, Somerville and St Hilda's for a long time. And it was the first time there were women at Jesus, Hertford, Cats, Brasenose and Wadham. And there were only 2 or 3, or in Wadham's case, no geography places at the other colleges. So really it was an utter no-brainer to apply to St Hugh's. The other reason for going to St Hugh's was Marge. So perhaps this is the Stone Age rather than being a dinosaur. Marge was the expert on limestone. Cast landforms, you can see my dog-eared copy there. Cast in China came later. And that charming little scribble on the right-hand side is a cartoon I produced for Herbo News entitled How to Enjoy Limestone. At that stage, the tutor was the person who chose his or her students. And at that stage, you got to Oxford by doing a general exam and a geography exam. And if you got through those, you got an interview. And Marge later told me that pretty well all the 9 of us that she had chosen that year were not great geographers. But we were really interesting, and our general papers had been fascinating. You probably don't get that advantage these days of showing that you're a really interesting person. But it's perhaps something that tutors might think about. Because although none of the 9 of us got a first, we've all gone on to do really interesting things, and I'll come on to that in a moment. What it also meant, that system, was that if you got awarded a place, and in my case that was at the beginning of my 5th term of 6th form, so you did the exam in the November, December, interviews just before Christmas, you were told you'd got a place in January, you could then enjoy yourself for the rest of your time at school, and you could do interesting things, in my case, producing plays and making costumes and having a wonderful further bit of CV that I could add to things later. And of course, that was something that I was able to carry on at Oxford. There was the place where we did geography in those days, the School of Geography, the SoGE. Not the SoGE, but the SoGE. Now I think it's the Department for International Development at the bottom of Mansfield Road. But in those days, that was where we lived and breathed geography when we weren't doing other things, obviously. We were an eclectic bunch in 1974. You will see there are 18 women amongst the approximately 90 people that there's only 18 of the women because 2 of them didn't manage to get to the photograph. That was taken in Manchester College, just over the road from the School of Geography. And you will see that there is a wide variety of hairstyles from 1974, a wide variety of clothing, of flared trousers. And the thing you won't appreciate about that picture, which was what dominated our time, certainly our first term in Oxford, which was that it was pouring with rain. And gosh, it rained. We are all sodden in that picture. because we were all sitting there. But of course, rain was what we studied. Rain was one of the fascinating things that in those days geography looked at with great interest. I'll come back to some of these people in a bit, because some of them have gone on to do interesting things. Not all of us, but some of us. That's the lecture list for that first term. You won't be able to read it, but it shows you what geography was about then. So we've got the use of the library, minerals, growth and distribution of population in developing countries, paleontology, ecology, stratigraphy, social ecology, population geography, perspective on geography, geographical exploration in the 19th century, which was a great deal nearer then at that time, evolution of urban settlement, meteorology and weather maps, very important as I say, main features of the relief of the continents and ocean, social ecology, social geography, air photographs, and field classes on a Saturday morning. And that was just for honour moderations the first year. The other years they did more exciting things. But that was what we were faced with when we first came. We also had the Herbertson Society, which was the Geographical Society, and that's the yellow one is the card for Hillary term 1975, and the white one is for Trinity 75. You'll see that there was to be arranged in that summer an EEC debate, because that was the year when there was the last vote on Europe. A lot of interesting things were done with the Herbo. It also ran a newspaper in which people could present their ideas, or in my case, their cartoons, because that was what I did in great abundance. And what sort of things did we talk about? Well, we obviously had field trips. There's me on Twistleton Scar in the fog, having measured a great deal of limestone. And there we are measuring the shape of the landscape. We did a lot of that. We did a lot of drinking. We had a lot of fun on that field trip. And afterwards, we realised that we had to do some writing up. And it was my first experience with a computer, ever. There was one computer in, I think it was the basement of the School of Geography, and you had to put in the data. And my diary notes that we spent a whole afternoon putting in data about pebble measurements, because we measured a lot of pebbles. And it was only afterwards we discovered that we'd been using the wrong formula. I'm sure that that doesn't happen, but as a first experience of computers and having to do it again, it stood us in good stead. At that stage, you have to understand the landscape in which we were operating. There were no mobile phones. The only telephone you had was a coin box, somewhere or other by the pigeonholes outside the JCR. There was no way of getting in touch with anybody by email or by Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, or all the other things my daughters now spend their time on. You sent a message by pigeon post, the college mail, which delivered it to your pigeonhole, and that was how you found out what was supposed to be happening. So here's a note from Steve Perkins, who was one of those people you saw in the main picture, asking me to help with one of my... I wanted some more brilliant artwork for Herbo News. And he had in mind a Jaws type picture, something, of undergraduates punting while the terrifying monster lurks ready underneath, bearing an uncanny resemblance to Patton, who's chairing mods, or whoever's doing finals, which was Marge. Any contribution at all would be very gratefully received. That was how you communicated. It was a really ponderous process. And it meant you had plenty of time for doing other things, like punting. In my case, going off to the Oxford Union, learning how to debate, becoming an officer there. If you go to the Union these days, you will see pictures of me up the staircase. It's very exciting. It was a very long time ago. And what did that lead to? Well, at the back of your programme, you will see the picture I drew as a result of that request. And that appeared in Herbo News and is one of my favourite cartoons. I did all sorts of other things. Lots of people did lots of other things. I was public exploder of the Gilbert and Sullivan Society. I made costumes for Ouds. I did playhouse productions. And as I say, the Oxford Union took over my life. That's where I met my husband and made a huge number of friends. And it's one of the reasons you may have wondered why I did archaeology after geography. I got elected in the Oxford Union at the end of my finals term and needed a really good excuse for staying on. And as I'd always wanted to do archaeology, and as Professor Cunliffe said yes when I made the application, I was able to do an MPhil. So that was wonderful. And that was the way we operated then. I'm sure it's different now. I'm sure you are very much more driven to look at career options and all the rest of it. But I have to tell you that we weren't. We were enjoying ourselves. And if there is one thing I can say to you all, for heaven's sake, enjoy the time you've got here, make the friends, drink the drinks, go to the parties, whatever it may happen to be, because the time you spend at university is so concentrated and so special that you will want to keep it with you for the rest of your life. And hopefully the rest of your life will be even more exciting. But that's for you to make the right choices. I've mentioned Marge as being one of the people who really inspired me. And gosh, she did. I was lucky enough when I passed the civil service exams and was given a job as administration trainee at the Department of the Environment. I was lucky enough to have the wit to think, do I really want to be a civil servant? And the answer came very quickly, no. And so I then went on and did all the uncertain things of doing the conversion course for the bar, reading for bar finals, and then the difficult bit of becoming a barrister. It's been suggested that it's something quite common for people to become barristers after reading geography. As Emma said, I don't know any others. And I don't see why there shouldn't be, because our capacity to sift evidence, to look at historical timelines, to look at stratigraphy, is exactly what you need when you are considering evidence. Is this dodgy evidence? Does it make sense? Are you able to think laterally? And I can tell you that the number of times I have been in a better position than some of my colleagues who got firsts in jurisprudence has been very gratifying. As Emma said, way back, 40 odd years ago, 35 perhaps, when I went to the bar, there were very few women. By that stage, it was largely the case that women had stopped aping men, although I know there were some of an older generation who wore wing collars all the time and smoked a lot and killed themselves in due course. But there were very few of us when I started at the bar, which was in 1982-83. I went to a set of chambers at 7 King's Bench Walk, which was an international shipping insurance set. They didn't have any women. And I hoped I could persuade them to become their first woman tenant. And I failed miserably because I realised I didn't like the work. When you've seen one cargo of onions going rotten, you've seen them all. Christmas trees that aren't delivered on time, it's a no-brainer that there's going to be a claim. It was really dull. And I was fortunate enough that Middle Temple had a student scheme, which still operates, where you could go in and say, I want a mentor, or a sponsor, as we call it at the bar. And fortunately, a woman had been in that morning complaining that they never sent her any decent spondees. Perfect, serendipitous match. June Rogers was the only woman in my set of chambers at the time. She took to me. She was a medieval historian who'd read at LMH before herself converting to the bar, so she had no hang-ups about women needing to have law degrees. She was my sponsor. She encouraged me to get into chambers, and she read the lesson at my wedding and has helped me ever since. In my set of chambers, we are now more than 50% women. We are more than 50, nearly 60 in number. But perhaps that's because we do a lot of what I call human misery. That's care proceedings and adoption and general family work. It used to be said there was a sort of gynecology of the law, that women would go towards that sort of work. I don't think that's fair these days, but certainly I appear very regularly in front of female judges, and there are very often cases where the only man is the father of the child, sometimes the usher in the court. I have also, and I've mentioned how geography has helped with the stratigraphy and all of that, I also have used my geography in another slightly different left field sort of way, in that I'm an ecclesiastical judge. I'm the Deputy Chancellor of the Diocese of Gloucester, where I make decisions about whether churches are entitled to have faculties granted to change their furnishings, reset their bells. I deal with bats in the belfry. I deal with historical buildings, churchyards, grave spaces, all sorts of things. And a lot of that is very geographically based. So let me show you some pictures. On the left is the picture of me as that 18-year-old in the rain, with my lovely brown suede boots filling up with water. On the right, there's me as a Deputy Chancellor in my wig and gown and bands and all the paraphernalia that the law thinks looks appropriate. But I'm not just that. As so many of the speakers have said, they are mothers. I'm not a mother of dragons. I'm a mother of a geographer. That is Flick, my elder daughter, who read geography, not here, but and is now in advertising, so not really using it. But I do encourage you, and both my daughters said I had to be very careful how I said this. Do not think that you can't do all of it and have children and a successful career. If you put your mind to it, you can. And there is no greater thrill than having a child, whether it's playing for England or reading geography, because you've inspired them. The next one along, Emma Saunders, who was another St Hugh's girl, who is now Lady Hood and has done all manner of amazing things, high altitude climbs, 1993 Everest exhibition. She's run restaurants, businesses. She's amazing. The next one is Ros Arnold, who was at Brasenose, one of the first women at Brasenose, who has recently retired as Professor Foskett. She went into geography teaching just at a senior school level and worked her way through a whole academic world, running universities, Southampton, Worcester, and she's now specialising, I think, in developing projects in Africa. The one on the left is Louise Rowe, who's now Lady Patton. She went into Citibank and she's done an amazing variety of banking jobs. The picture below is another of my slightly dodgy cartoons. Is of Dr. Patton, who was our population geography lecturer, who she married. You're probably not allowed to do that these days, but in those days it was fine. And they are very happy and still together, and they have a daughter. Next one along, I'm sorry, Denise and Val were the ones that missed the School of Geography photos, so you have to have them in matriculation. But they were St Hugh's girls like me. Denise went to be a television presenter on the Isle of Wight. Then she got into publishing, and she is dressed here. I don't know whether any of you recognise it as the costume of a High Sheriff. She has just finished being the High Sheriff of West Sussex and is now the wife of one of her authors. Val Guest, top right, now Val Scarlett, did what some regard as the traditional career of being a geography teacher. And she has recently retired as head of geography at her school. And down here, St Anne's girl, Sue Smith, who has gone on to be a professor at Durham, Edinburgh, and is now master, or as I would prefer it to be, mistress of Girton College, Cambridge. Actually, it probably is mistress of Girton. That's the sort of thing they do. You might not have noticed it, but her name appeared on that first Herbertson term card. She was one of the keen ones in our year, and she was on the committee in that second term. You might think those are a pretty impressive bunch of people. And of course, because we're all in our 60s, you've had time to develop all those interesting careers. So all of these ladies that you've already heard from are going to do something amazing beyond what they've already done. And when they come back in another 20 years' time, as they probably will, you will discover how much more interesting they have become. My most famous colleague is my political geography tutorial partner. Theresa Brazier, as a very young 18-year-old on the left, and in one of her more relaxed moments. She was actually a very good geographer. She wrote some very good essays, and particularly when I had been a little bit tired the night before, she would always step in and read her essay if mine wasn't quite finished. She was a very good geographer, a very good friend, and she has gone on to, whatever anybody may think about her politics, and I do appreciate there may be differences of opinion, she has gone on to use her geography as Prime Minister in a whole range of environmental and sociological ways. And I would not wish you to imagine that she simply stopped her geography when she finished her degree and went to the Bank of England as her first step on the road to greatness. Now, I think I've given you enough of an idea of how we have all ended up so far. Who knows what else will happen? Words of wisdom to those of you who haven't even got your foot on that rung of the ladder. Stop and think before you accept the obvious career opportunity. If the civil service isn't going to be for you, and you've taken the exam because everybody else did and it seemed like a good idea to see whether you were clever, don't do it. If there is an easy option that you think, oh, well, maybe I'll just try it as a stopgap, think very seriously before doing that. You have to do something you enjoy. The bar is for me, as it is for Emma, because we're self-employed. We can choose when to go off and have babies. We have to hope the solicitors will still want to brief us when we come back. but I've had 2 and it seems to have worked. And it's not a bad career if you like the sound of your own voice. At which point I better shut up.